There are years that pass quietly, moments lost between headlines and history books. But every few generations, a year arrives like a storm, unseen, unwelcome, and unstoppable. 2025 is one of those years. But what if someone saw it coming? Not a world leader, not a scientist, but a quiet woman with a gaze that seemed to pierce through time. Her name was Jeane Dixon, and long before most of us were born, she warned the world of a year that would change everything. The year 2025. Born in 1904 in a small Wisconsin town, Jeane Dixon was different from the beginning. Her parents, devout Catholics, noticed strange things. At just 5 years old, she insisted her mother find an envelope with a black border. There was none in the house. 10 days later, a letter arrived. Her grandfather had died, and the envelope, black-bordered, exactly as she described. She spoke of events before they happened, new visitors before they knocked, and once declared that her father would return from a trip with a black and white dog. Days later, he did. Her visions only intensified. By age 7, her family brought her to a traveling Egyptian palm reader. The woman studied her hand in silence, then said, "Your daughter is a prophet. She sees what others cannot. She will speak for the future." The fortune teller gave Jeane a small crystal sphere, wrapped in silk. That same day, Jeane warned the woman, "Be careful with the stove. You're going to get burned." Days later, she did. By the 1940s, Jeane Dixon had earned a quiet reputation, not for spectacle, but for certainty. One day in 1942, she entered an upscale beauty salon in Los Angeles. There, she approached the famous actress Carole Lombard. In a low, almost hesitant voice, she said, "Please do not travel by air for the next 6 months. There is danger. You will not survive." Lombard laughed it off. She had a flight scheduled in a few days. 6 days later, her plane slammed into a Nevada mountain. Everyone on board perished. The newspapers called it a tragedy, but a handful of witnesses remembered what had been said days before by Jeane Dixon. Jeane's name began to circulate through higher circles, whispered in salons, fundraisers, and finally the White House. In 1944, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, weakened by illness, sent word to her. Car arrived at her doorstep. She was brought to Washington, D.C. No cameras, no press. In a private conversation, Roosevelt asked simply, "How long do I have left?" Jeane replied without blinking, "No more than 6 months." He died 5 months later. His successor, Harry S. Truman, another man she predicted would one day lead the nation. But perhaps her most infamous prophecy came in 1956, in an article for Parade magazine. There, she wrote, "The 1960 election will be won by a Democrat, but he will not finish his first term. He will die violently." At the time, few noticed. The young senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, hadn't even declared his candidacy. But in 1963, he was assassinated, shot in Dallas. The country grieved. And then, something even stranger happened. Dixon had said the assassin's name would begin with O, contain an S, and end in a letter shaped like a hook. O-S-D. Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald. Even skeptics fell silent. Over the years, Dixon continued to publish predictions, some mundane, some dramatic, but there was one year she could never let go of. A number that appeared again and again in her speeches, interviews, and writings. 2025. She called it a turning point, not just for America, but for all of humanity. In her 1971 book, The Call to Glory, she described a coming crisis, a conflict that would not be fought with armies, but with systems. She foresaw a global battle between two rising giants, China and Russia, not a war of bombs, but of dominance over ideology, information, and fate. She warned of a collapse in trust, a loss of faith, a generation that would become so connected, they'd forget how to feel. She saw machines speaking in human voices, and humans speaking less and less. Jeane didn't call it AI. She didn't know the term, but her vision was unmistakable. We will face a battle not for land, but for the soul of the human race. And the year it all begins, she said, would be 2025. But Jeane Dixon wasn't the only one who saw shadows forming around 2025. Thousands of miles away, in a different culture, another strange vision emerged. In 1999, a Japanese manga artist named Ryo Tatsuki published a little-known graphic novel titled The Future I Saw. In it, she recorded 15 vivid dreams, each tied to a specific event and date in the future. Over time, one by one, these events unfolded just as she described. 14 came true, from natural disasters to political upheavals. Her predictions seemed impossibly accurate. But the 15th dream, the final vision, has not yet happened. And that vision pointed to a very specific date, July 5th, 2025. In that dream, a catastrophic event would strike the South China Sea. A landmass would rise violently from beneath the ocean, connecting parts of Japan with Taiwan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. It would be greater than Japan's 2011 Tohoku earthquake, and more devastating than anything the region had ever experienced. People dismissed it. A manga? A dream? But what if it wasn't just a dream? What if it was another thread in a much older web? In 2010, on a Japanese internet forum, an anonymous user appeared. He claimed to be a time traveler from the year 2062. At first, no one believed him, but he posted a series of bizarrely specific predictions, including one about an upcoming disaster in 2011. He wrote, "Evacuate coastal areas. Go inland, especially in northern Japan." Weeks later, on March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami struck the Tohoku region, killing over 15,000 people. The forum erupted. Was it coincidence or something else? Then he disappeared until 2022 when he returned. And this time, his warning was eerily aligned with Tatsuki's final dream. He wrote, "July 2025, the South China Sea will not be calm. Prepare for what has never been seen before." Two prophecies, two sources, 2 decades apart, both pointing to the same place and the same date. Here's where things get truly unsettling. In early 2024, a series of minor tectonic anomalies were detected beneath the South China Sea. Unusual pressure, shifting subduction zones, pattern not seen in decades. Most scientists dismissed it. Just noise, they said. But geologists in Taiwan and Vietnam quietly raised concerns. Could something be rising beneath the sea? A volcanic uplift? An undersea ridge forming faster than expected? There's no evidence of a massive landmass about to rise, but there wasn't evidence before Krakatoa either. And if a new island were to form, connecting fault lines and disrupting maritime borders, what kind of geopolitical chaos would follow? War over resources, claims over new territory, disputes between China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Japan. The Earth itself could draw battle lines, and all of it pointing back to the same whispered year, 2025. But even if no wave rises, something else has, a quieter war, one without borders or bullets. Jeane Dixon described it long ago, Though she didn't have the words we now use. There will be no sirens, no bombs, but still nations will fall. Not from invasion, but from within. Today, we live in a world where truth itself is fractured. Deepfakes blur reality. AI writes headlines. Entire elections hinge on algorithms. And the minds of billions are shaped by what they see on a screen. Trust is currency, and it is collapsing. We don't know who to believe, what's real, what's not. This is the invisible war she foresaw. A war for perception, a war for control of meaning. And make no mistake, we are already fighting it. Dixon also warned of a deeper crisis, one not in the news, but in the soul. She called it the Great Emptiness, a time when people would turn away from each other, when relationships would be replaced by transactions, and when technology would offer companionship, but not connection. Sounds strange, until you realize how many people now live through screens. Eat alone, speak less, scroll more, mental health crises, suicide rates, loneliness epidemics, all rising, even in the most advanced nations. We've gained the ability to speak to the world, but lost the capacity to listen. In one of her last interviews, Jeane said, "We will reach for knowledge and let go of wisdom." Perhaps that is the real prophecy, not a single moment, but a slow erosion of meaning, of memory, of what it means to be human. For all her grim predictions, Jeane Dixon spoke not only of collapse, but of hope. In her later years, she began to speak more often of a figure she called the reconciler. Not a prophet, not a president, but someone born in silence, raised in hardship, who would rise from the ashes of 2025. A person of great love, she wrote, whose compassion would bridge the chasm between peoples. This reconciler would not bring peace through speeches or slogans. They would not wear a crown or wave a flag. Instead, they would simply listen, and in listening, heal. She never gave this person a name, only the year they would appear, the year everything broke, and everything had to begin again, 2025. But here's the question that haunts every prophecy. If the future can be seen, can it still be changed? Or are we locked into the fate the visionaries describe? Jeane Dixon herself believed in two timelines, one fated and one chosen. She said visions show only the strongest possibility, not inevitability. The future, she said, is like a river with many forks, and every decision we make determines which path the current follows. So perhaps the wars, the disasters, the emptiness, they don't have to happen. But the tragedy isn't in the prophecy coming true. It's in us ignoring the chance to stop it. That's the real danger. Not the vision, but our inaction. So far, 2025 has not brought a great war. No tsunami has risen from the South China Sea. No reconciler has yet stepped into the light. And yet, something is happening. Climate disasters are accelerating. Water shortages are becoming the new normal. AI systems are making decisions no human fully understands. Truth is splintered. Families, friends, even entire nations are turning inward. But here's what matters. Every prophecy is also a mirror. It reflects not just what might come, but who we are becoming. If we see only chaos in the mirror, perhaps that's what we've allowed to grow within us. But if we look deeper, past fear, past pride, we might still find something else. A choice. Before her death, Jeane Dixon gave one last message, one final vision. She saw a world where people began to remember, to reach across division, to awaken, not with fire and fury, but with silence, with forgiveness, with understanding. She said, "There will be war, But in the same year, a voice will rise, and that voice will speak with such truth that even enemies will pause. Perhaps that's what the reconciler truly is, not a person, but a part of all of us, the part that listens, that understands, that remembers how to love. 2025 doesn't have to be the end, can still be the beginning, but the choice isn't made by prophets. It's made by you. You may not believe in prophecy. You may see it as fiction, as metaphor, as myth. But what if it's more than that? What if, in every ancient vision, every cryptic warning, every eerie coincidence, there's a voice? And what if that voice is not speaking to you, but through you? We cannot stop the tides. We cannot silence the storms, but we can choose who we become when they come. 2025 may be written in the pages of mystics, but the final chapter is still blank. So I leave you with this. If the future knocks, will you listen, or will you scroll past, as if it never called your name?